Israel is committing a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, with over 50,000 Palestinians murdered since October 2023. But how did it actually get to this point? In order to answer this question, we have to go back over 100 years with the Balfour Declaration of 1917. The Balfour Declaration was issued on the 2nd of November 1917 and was a public promise made by Britain to establish a Jewish state. This declaration was part of the British Mandate for Palestine, which was a League of Nations mandate that was used to kind of distribute territories after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. The purpose of this mandate was to redistribute territories that had been lost by defeated powers during the First World War by the Western Allies. However, this mandate in the case of Palestine was used to establish a Jewish state, which we now know as Israel. This mandate facilitated increased immigration of European Jewish people into the Middle East and allowed them to self-rule. The Balfour Declaration was problematic, and it was contradictory on two fronts. First of all, it contradicted a promise made by Britain just 2 years earlier for Arab populations to have their own independence from the Ottoman Empire. It also broke Britain's promise to the French, which decided that Palestine was to be under international administration, except for a small fraction of the land, which would be distributed between British and French administration. The Balfour Declaration, in fact, though, made sure that Palestine was under British occupation and did not provide the Palestinian population with their own independence, as promised earlier. So this declaration and the British Mandate catalyzed a huge influx of European immigration into Palestine, and this often led to the displacement of native Palestinians, and when they resisted, this was suppressed by the British authorities. Moving forward to the conclusion of the Second World War and the end of the Holocaust, we see a massive rise in Zionism, which essentially is the belief that Jewish people have the right to their own homeland in the Middle East. So in 1947, the United Nations mandated that Palestine was to be split into two. One state for a Jewish population and one state for the native Palestinian population. This partition was favoured greatly by Zionists. However, the native Palestinian population and surrounding Arab states were not on board. Objection to this mandate was understandable, as it was an unfair distribution of land. It handed over half of Palestine to a population that did not equate to half of the total population of Palestine, and to a population that owned significantly less land than the Palestinians did. A year later, the State of Israel was declared, immediately following the expiration of the British Mandate in Palestine. The declaration of the State of Israel on the 14th of May 1948 immediately catalyzed what is now known as the First Arab-Israeli War. The Arab-Israeli War led to the displacement of 750,000 Palestinians, and Israel occupied 78% of Palestinian land. The remaining land is now what makes up the West Bank and Gaza, which is now occupied by Israeli forces. Between 1947 and 1949, the IOF destroyed at least 530 Palestinian villages and murdered an approximate 15,000 Palestinians. The 15th of May 1948 has since been dubbed the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, and it marks the date that sparked this displacement and dispossession of Palestinian people by the IOF. The remaining territory of the West Bank and Gaza were attacked in 1967, with Israel launching a war to occupy these remaining territories, as well as East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and Sinai. These territories remain to this day occupied by the IOF, with Palestinians subjected to extensive human rights violations, blockade, and violence by the IOF. Palestinians are now forced to live under a system of apartheid, with their movement, land ownership, and rights extensively restricted by Israel. Israeli forces continue to violently remove Palestinians from their home in order to expand the Israeli settlement. This is a violation of international law. Of course, Palestinian resistance to this occupation has existed in many forms throughout the last 100 years, but the fight is still continuing today. Since October of 2023 alone, Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people has led to the murder of 50,000 Palestinians, the majority of which have been women and children. Currently, a child is murdered every 45 minutes in Gaza. Every 45 minutes. And the majority of these children who have been murdered have been under the age of 10 years old, with at least 825 of these children under a year old when their life was taken away from them by the Israeli occupation. For 77 years, Palestinians have been subjected to intense violence under the Israeli occupation, and that is 77 years too many. I'll be posting soon on what you can do from Australia in order to help Palestinians, but for now, make sure you go research the BDS list and ensure that you aren't giving your money to companies that are assisting in this genocide against Palestinian people. You can also email your MPs and demand that we sanction Israel and cut ties with this genocidal state, as well as doing your own research on Israel, the occupation, and how you can help Palestinians. If you made it this far, thank you so much for taking the time to educate yourself. And remember, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free Palestine.